Q Review, print speaking to the blind, celebrating 40 years of audio newspaper production. Welcome to this week's edition of the National Podcast, recorded at the Bishop Briggs Media Centre by our amazing volunteers. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, Twitter or Instagram using @QuenReview, that is @symbol CUEANDREVIEW. You can also contact us directly by emailing information@quenreview.com. That is INFORMATION @symbol CUEANDREVIEW.com, or by calling 0141 772 3976. That's 0141 772 3976.
From the National, Friday the 10th of May, from the news section, innovative Scottish startup named Best Small Business in the UK. Report by Alistair Ferguson. A Scottish startup that is pioneering the sustainability industry in carbon capture has been named the Best Small Business in the UK. CCU International won the Innovation Award and overall Best Small Business prize at the UK finals of the FSB Celebrating Small Business Awards on May the 9th. It is the fourth time in 5 years that a Scottish firm has claimed the UK title. The Edinburgh-based startup uses advanced technology to capture carbon dioxide straight from the industrial chimneys and exhaust stacks and turns it into useful products in everyday commodities. The captured CO2 can be converted in many ways, including fuel for planes, building materials, and even ingredients for shampoo and toothpaste. Beena Sharma, co-founder and CEO of CCU International, said the company has been able to create something in 15 months that others haven't been able to do in 15 years. She said, "When our Chief Technical Officer, Professor Peter Styring, first developed this technology 15 years ago, we were told again and again, this isn't going to work. In the 15 months since we spun out the company to apply the technology commercially, we have won contracts with Unilever, Procter & Gamble, and all the big blue chip companies. We have managed to do in 15 months what our competitors haven't been able to do in 15 years. These awards are a huge achievement for the team and gives us the platform to go to the next level. Our ambitions now are global and we have plans for major growth." 2 other Scottish firms were also named best in their class at the UK Awards. Sustainability advisors Beyond Green won the Diversity and Inclusion Award as they help clients make informed decisions about the environmental impacts of their businesses. Boogie Beat Music and Movement Edinburgh were Franchise Business of the Year for their fun and inclusive workshops which work with schools, nurseries and care homes. FSB National Chair Martin McTague spoke highly of the Scottish winners this year and said CCU International is a shining example of innovation in the sustainability industry. He said, "Yet again, Scottish businesses have triumphed in the UK final of our awards. Many congratulations to all 3 winners from Scotland, and extra congratulations to CCU International for taking the overall Small Business of the Year title, the 4th Scottish business to earn that crown in 5 years. CCU International is a shining example of how the small businesses are harnessing and driving innovation, technology and sustainability to energise the economy and inspire the next generation. Small businesses are at the heart of Scotland's economy and communities, and this year's awards have shone a light on the talent, resilience and ingenuity of entrepreneurs across the nation." And that article was written by Alistair Ferguson and read by me, Ian McKenna. From the National, Friday the 10th of May, from the news section, John Swinney pleased with inclusivity talk with LGBTQ+ group. Report by Alistair Ferguson. John Swinney says he is pleased to have a constructive conversation with an SNP LGBTQ+ group which had raised concerns over the appointment of Kate Forbes as Deputy First Minister. The SNP LGBTQ+ group Out for Independence, OFI, had raised concerns from members of the group and the wider LGBTQ+ community with views held by the recently appointed Forbes. The MSP for Skye, Lochaber and Badenoch was officially confirmed as Swinney's deputy on Thursday, and has previously said she would have voted against gay marriage were she an MSP at the time. After her appointment, the OFI released a statement saying they were aware of the real concerns within the LGBTQ+ community at the appointment of Kate Forbes, given the views she has previously presented. However, this evening Swinney met with the members of OFI and reasserted his earlier commitments that the expectations of inclusivity in his government apply to everyone, and has apologised if that was not made clear. In a statement online, the OFI said the First Minister was able to provide specific reassurances that he and his Cabinet will move forward with the Conversion Practices Bill and that it will remain trans-inclusive. The group also noted that Forbes had released a statement prior to their meeting where she stated she was committed to the collective responsibility of the Cabinet and will serve everyone, which includes the LGBT community. Talking to Twitter/X after the meeting, Swinney said, "I was pleased to have a constructive conversation with Outfit India this afternoon. Throughout my time in government, I have been proud to support, promote and advance LGBT rights, and the government I now lead will continue to do so." OFI noted they were grateful for the commitments made by the First Minister and his deputy, but it did say actions do speak louder than words. They also said they will continue to monitor the progress of all legislation relating to the advancement of LGBTQ+ rights by the Scottish Government. The full statement from OFI said, "We want to thank John Swinney and Shirley Ann Somerville for their time this evening and for the frank, honest and open discussion about the LGBTQ+ community's concerns with recent appointments, as well as the future advancement of LGBTQ+ rights in Scotland." The FM reasserted his commitments made earlier today and confirmed that the expectations of his government apply to everyone in his government. The FM also took the time to apologise if this was not made clear sooner, which we appreciate. The First Minister also, rightly, noted his track record in advancing LGBTQ+ rights and representation, most specifically ensuring that Scotland became the first country in the world to have LGBTQ+ inclusive education. We also would like to note the scarcely reported statement made by Kate Forbes today, where she gives her commitment to collective responsibility of Cabinet and that she stands by the FM as he seeks to serve everybody, including the LGBT community. As this has not been widely reported, we will separately share the full text of Ms Forbes' statement. During our conversations this evening, the FM was able to provide specific reassurances that he and his Cabinet will move forward the Conversion Practices Bill and that it will remain trans-inclusive. The FM also expressed his support for the advancement of queer rights for all in our community. We are grateful for the range of commitments made by the FM this evening and choose to believe Ms Forbes' words. However, at the end of the day, actions do speak louder than words, and we will continue to monitor the progress of all legislation relating to the advancement of LGBTQ+ rights and hope that these words are followed through upon. We appreciate and value that SNP has a leader who responds to his members and understands the value of critical friends. It's a strength and a tribute to our party that we're able to come together, discuss difficult issues and ensure the voices of members and activists are heard. We stand ready to aid the FM and his team in any way we can to achieve a progressive, equal and independent Scotland. And that article was written by Alistair Ferguson. From the National, Friday the 10th of May, from the politics section, Keir Starmer refuses to work with SNP, but might with Lib Dems. Report by Alistair Ferguson. Keir Starmer has not ruled out a coalition with the Lib Dems after the next general election, but has insisted he will not make any deal with the SNP. The Labour leader has refused to deny he would make a deal with the Lib Dems if his party were unable to win a majority of seats at the next general election. However, he was quick to set the record straight and ruled out any deal before or after the election with the SNP. According to recent projections from after the English local elections, Labour would be the largest party after the next general election. However, They are expected to fail to secure enough seats to establish a majority government by themselves. Sky News analysed more than 2 million votes cast in English council elections and used them to estimate a national vote share. The stats indicate that Labour's vote has risen from 33% in 2019 to 35%, with the Lib Dems giving a percentage increase by 5 points to 16%. With Sky's projection, Labour could potentially have to reach an agreement with the Lib Dems to secure a majority in the case of a hung parliament. Speaking to Sky News, Starmer, who had previously said his party would not go into a coalition with anyone, would not rule out a potential deal with the Lib Dems if his party were unable to secure a majority. He said, "I'm ruling out any deal with the SNP before or after the election. Am I going for a majority Labour government? Yes, I am. That depends on whether we can earn the trust and confidence of voters across the country." When asked for confirmation if his party would link up with the Lib Dems if needed to have a majority government, Starmer replied, "Well, I'm going for a majority. That's the answer I gave you 2 years ago. A year ago, it's the same answer I gave you then." Starmer also ruled out any flights to Rwanda taking off under a Labour government. He stated if his party takes power, they don't want to be seen as flogging a dead horse, and called the scheme a gimmick he isn't prepared to continue with. He said, "There will be no flights scheduled or taking off after the general election if Labour wins that general election. I think the scheme is a gimmick. I'm not flogging a dead horse. I'm not prepared to do government by gimmick. I want to start on day one, not with flights taking off by absolutely investing my political capital in the law enforcement. No flights, no Rwanda scheme. It's a gimmick." And that article was written by Alistair Ferguson.
The National, recorded on Wednesday 15th of May 2024. The Culture section. Back in the Day. How the Ancient Scottish Town of St Andrews Became the Home of Golf. By Hamish McPherson, journalist. In this final column of 3 about the town of St Andrews, I will show how it became the most famous town in Scotland due almost entirely to the game of golf. My first column dealt with the ancient history of St Andrews and how it became important, mainly through the religious institutions in the town, and last week I showed how St Andrews was at the heart of the Scottish Protestant Reformation, arguably the most crucial series of events in Scottish history before the suicidal Act of Union in 1707. Today's column relies heavily on numerous books about the history of golf, as well as the dozens of websites about the subject, including that maintained by the Royal Borough of St Andrews Community Council. I applaud them for keeping the Royal Borough name alive. I always thoroughly check anything about Scottish history that I find online, and perhaps a future column will feature the many bloopers, to use a polite word, that I have found. I discovered none about St Andrews, so thanks to all the creators. Before turning to golf, let me continue where I left off last week, with St Andrews having been the headquarters of the Catholic Church in Scotland. The Reformation was an overall disaster for the town, though its people seem to have joined in the national mood of alteration to Presbyterianism. One of those townspeople was the scholar, philosopher and Presbyterian reformer Andrew Melville, 1545 to 1622. He was acclaimed across Europe as one of the leading thinkers of his day, and was not only educated at St Andrews University, but also later taught there and was its rector. Famous for his disputations, mostly over bishops, with King James VI and I, Melville once called the king God's silly vassal, and lived to tell the tale, though he was imprisoned and exiled for a while. He was also famed as a poet, and was chosen to read his own Latin poem at the coronation of James VI's Queen, Anne of Denmark. Melville's nephew James was also a leading Presbyterian reformer, and taught at the university, which was at the centre of the long disputes within the Church of Scotland over episcopacy. The Melvilles' fractious relationship with the king did not damage St Andrews. Indeed, while in England, James VI and I made the town a royal borough in 1620. Also educated at St Andrews was James Graham, later the first Marquess of Montrose. Interestingly, he was recorded as a keen golfer, but his siding with the House of Stuart made him unpopular in the town, which rejoiced when he lost the Battle of Philipshaw in 1645. King Charles II acted after the restoration of the monarchy in 1660 to bring back archbishops and bishops. One of them was James Sharp, a Kirk minister who was a keen Episcopalian and was made Archbishop of St Andrews in 1661, having been a student and professor at the university. Joining the Privy Council, through which Charles II ruled Scotland, Sharp became notorious for his persecution of the Covenanters who were against bishops and the increasing Anglicisation of the Kirk under the King. He was quite brutal in the suppression of the Pentland Rising by Covenanters. The third last Protestant Archbishop of St Andrews was assassinated in the Magnus Muir, 3 miles west of St Andrews, on May 2, 1679, by 9 Covenanters who stopped his coach and killed Sharp in front of his daughter Isabella. 6 of the assassins were never caught. One of them, James Russell, said he had told Sharp why they were killing him. I declared before the Lord that it was no particular interest, nor yet for any wrong that he has done unto him, but because he had betrayed the church as Judas and had wrung his hands these 18 or 19 years in the blood of the saints, but especially at Pentland. The assassination and the end of the archbishopric caused the fortunes of the town to dwindle, and by the end of the 17th century, there were even suggestions that the university might relocate to Perth. These came to nothing, and despite fluctuations in its fortunes, St Andrews University came to be known as one of the best in the UK, if not the entire world. St Andrews also became known globally thanks to the spectacular spread of a sport that was undeniably devised in Scotland. Even if the Dutch played a version of it many centuries ago, the word golf probably derives from the Dutch word kolf, meaning a club. I'm not going to get into the still ongoing controversies about who invented golf and where it was first played, but there's absolutely no doubt as to which Scottish town is known as the home of golf. Readers will know that I'm a huge admirer of King David I, who I consider to be Scotland's greatest monarch, but until I started researching this article, I was not aware that King David can make a fair claim to be the man who made St Andrews what it is today. That's because in 1123, in his capacity as Prince of the Cumbrians and heir to the Scottish throne, he acceded to it the following year when his brother Alexander I died. David gave a charter to St Andrews which decreed that the links was common land for all the people of the town. It remains in public ownership to this day. There is some evidence that a form of golf was being played in the town's links in the 1400s, and indeed almost all early golf in Scotland was played in links courses such as Bruntsfield and Leith in Edinburgh, Musselburgh and what is now East Lothian, and Ely in Fife. The game was so popular that in 1457 King James II got the Scottish Parliament to ban football and golf so men could concentrate on their archery skills at a time when war with England was a constant possibility. The ban was renewed by James III, but James IV loved playing golf, and records of his purchase of clubs and balls still exist. Perhaps he should have maintained the ban, as the Scottish army was outclassed at the disastrous Battle of Flodden in 1513, during which James IV himself was hacked to death. By 1552, the playing of golf in St Andrews Links was so popular that Archbishop John Hamilton issued a charter confirming the right of the townspeople to play golf on there, the single most important piece of evidence of its role as the foundation course for the sport. 2 years before he made St Andrews a royal borough, in 1618 King James VI and I decreed that golf could be played on a Sunday by all layers of society in Scotland, and there's no doubt that St Andrews began to benefit from visitors keen to play the course on the links. The university students were also able to play there, and there is a letter preserved in the National Library of Scotland in which a tutor, James Morris, asks the father of 3 students how often they should be allowed to play. The father, a lawyer named John Mackenzie, permitted them to play twice a week when the weather was fair. The fame of the course was spreading as golf began to be played across Scotland and England, but it was the townspeople themselves who ensured that St Andrews would become the home of golf. There are other clubs which have legitimate claims to be older, the Royal Burgess Golfing Society in Edinburgh and the Honourable Company of Edinburgh Golfers are 2, but in 1754, a group of 22 prominent citizens of St Andrews, including landowners and university professors, got together and formed the Society of St Andrews Golfers. It is often erroneously thought that the society produced the first rules of golf, but that honour belongs to Edinburgh, where the Honourable Company needed rules for a tournament for the Silver Club Trophy, presented by the Town Council. That is why the document recording the original 13 rules of golf is to be found in the archive of Edinburgh City Council. The Society of St Andrews Golfers adopted those rules and published them. Such was the prestige of St Andrews that its rules began to be adopted wherever golf was played. The Society would later become the Royal and Ancient Golf Club of St Andrews, gaining the title Royal from King William IV in 1834. Other innovations came at St Andrews. The course we now know as the Old Course only became old after the new course was developed late in the 19th century. Originally had 22 holes, but in 1764 it was reconfigured to have 18, and that became the standard number for all courses. One of the best compliments which recognised St Andrews as the headquarters of golf came in the book Kay's Portraits of Edinburgh, several editions of which were produced in the early 19th century. Mostly written by James Patterson and edited by James Maidment, with the brilliant etchings of John Kay. The portraits mention how Edinburgh golfers were reliant on St Andrews for their basic equipment. The portrait states, "The balls were bought from St Andrews and retailed by the tavern keepers at 6p painted and 5p unpainted. So little had they advanced in price from the days of our 6th James, when a ball cost 4 shillings Scots, i.e. 4p sterling. The price of a club at present, £13 and 6p, and of a ball, 2 shillings. At St Andrews about 12 hands are constantly employed in making balls, and besides the quantity required for their own locality, averaging from 3,000 to 4,000, upwards of 8,000 are annually disposed of in other markets. There are 2 golfing clubs belonging to St Andrews. One of them, instituted in 1754, is composed of the nobility, gentry and professors, the other of a more plebeian order of citizens. The former are distinguished by wearing red coats, the other green. The R&A went from strength to strength and was recognised as the governing body of golf for many decades. Its rule dating from 1897 is why all cups and greens globally are 4.25 inches, 108mm in diameter. The development of the Open Championship and other tournaments made the R&A the force it still remains. The home of golf also had many innovative course designers and developers of clubs and balls. Golf made St Andrews famous, but then in a real sense St Andrews made golf. To be included in this series in Scotland's ancient towns, they must have established as a town, usually a borough, before the Reformation in 1560. They need to have played a part in the history of Scotland and have a thoroughly researched history. Anyone who wants to promote their ancient town for a column should email me at nationalhamish@gmail.com. Do keep the suggestions coming. By Hamish Macpherson. The National, recorded on Tuesday, 14th of May 2024. The Culture Section. Eurovision 2024. Organisers respond to complaints of tense atmosphere. By Adam Robertson, multimedia journalist. Eurovision organisers have responded following allegations of a tense and horrible atmosphere backstage at this year's contest. The event faced backlash this year as many boycotted due to Israel's entry amid the ongoing bombardment of Gaza. Italy's Angelina Mango and Ireland's Bambi Thug were among those to talk of a tense atmosphere, while the latter said F*** the EBU while speaking to reporters afterwards and accused organisers of not supporting them amid a row with Israel. In a statement on Monday, the EBU, which runs Eurovision, acknowledged that several contestants had lodged complaints. It said, "We regret that some delegations at the Eurovision Song Contest in Malmo didn't respect the spirit of the rules and the competition both on-site and during their broadcasts. We spoke to a number of delegations during the event regarding various issues that were brought to our attention. The EBU's governing bodies will, together with the heads of delegations, review the events surrounding the ESC in Malmo to move forward in a positive way and to ensure the values of the event are respected by everyone. Individual cases will be discussed by the event's governing body, the Eurovision Song Contest Reference Group, made up of representatives from participating broadcasters at its next meeting." Thousands of people protested in the streets of Malmo about Israel's entry Eden Golan, who faced booing from the crowd during her performance. Following the final, Bambi Thug accused Israel's national broadcaster, Kan, of inciting violence against them during its coverage. Lithuania's entrant Sylvester Belt meanwhile said that he regretted taking part in the final altogether. Several entrants, including the UK's Ollie Alexander, signed a joint statement calling for a ceasefire in Gaza in the run-up to the contest. Elsewhere, Dutch singer Joost Klein was also sent home after being accused of intimidating behaviour by a female member of the production crew. By Adam Robertson, The National, recorded on Tuesday, 14th of May 2024. The Culture Section, exclusive. New West Highland Way set film seeks to challenge mental health perceptions. By Adam Robertson, multimedia journalist. A new film shot and set in Scotland is aiming to challenge the stigma surrounding mental health in a bid to point people who need it towards the help which is available. Made in a budget of £45,000, The Low Road was shot over 4 weeks by a crew of 6 people headed up by director Stephen Mulhern. It tells the story of student Ellie, Rachel Dick, and her best friend Lewis, Adam Bregman, who both suffer with mental health issues. When the latter takes his own life, Ellie sets out on a major hike with the end goal of visiting Lewis's bereaved mother in Skye, a hike he had been planning to undertake himself. It's a tale of hope, but also the stark reality facing a lot of young people right now to do with suicide rates and self-harming, the film's producer Sophie Marsh told The National. According to figures from the National Records of Scotland, there were 762 probable suicides in 2022, an increase of 9 in the previous year. Meanwhile, Scottish Health Survey 2021 revealed that 16% of those aged 16 to 24 had ever self-harmed, compared with 0% of those aged 75% and over. Crucially, Marsh says the film intends to challenge typical media portrayals of mental health on screen, which was achieved by drawing on lived experience. She explained, the whole script was based on lived experience, and a lot of that came from me. But also interviews that the director and myself did with people, including his teenage daughter. I'm in my mid-40s now, but when I was a teenager I struggled. I was living away from home and took to self-harming as a way of having control when my emotions were heightened, and I didn't have the tools to deal with them. It also leans into experiences of everyday misogyny that I had growing up as a woman. The film itself is unlikely to release until 2025, as its makers are keen to make sure it is a run on the festival circuit. More information can be found here. www.thelowroadmovie.com/about. Alongside this, they are also hoping there will be an educational tour upon its release to help make an impact. We noticed when we started looking into this subject that there's a deafening silence around the realities of self-harm, Marsh says. It's noticeable in the past with certain films that there's a rose-tinted look at the whole problem, and there's actually been cases of suicide contagion that Samaritans told us about, where sometimes when things are depicted on TV or in films, there's a rise in the increase of the number of people admitted to hospital, or those trying to take their own lives. Instead, she explains, the film aims to tackle the subject in a way that has an impact, but is also keen to stress that there is more to the characters than just their struggles. We want people to receive help and give a message of hope, but realistically, which feels really important, the protagonist talks about being broken but continuing on, and that was really important for us because you can sometimes put the film gloss on something, and life isn't like that. We wanted a beautiful film and a great story. One thing the film won't have any issues showcasing is Scotland's natural beauty, with filming taking place across a range of locations. Our main character goes on this journey along the West Highland Way for her friends, so we shot there and also in the Trossachs as well, and a bit in Glencoe, Marsh says. The main thing is we really wanted to show that people with mental health struggles are multifaceted. There's moments of light-heartedness and humour, it's not purely sort of doom and gloom. It's showing people how they really are, and I think we've achieved that from our personal experience with the matter. By Adam Robertson. The National, recorded on Wednesday, 15th of May 2024. The Culture Section. Glasgow Airport forced to change sign after major Gaelic blunder. By Adam Robertson, multimedia journalist. Glasgow Airport has been told to act after a sign for a restaurant appeared to mix up Irish and Scottish Gaelic. In a post on Twitter on Tuesday morning, Gaelic speaker and the co-owner of Gaelic projects agency Astar, Murdo McSween, pointed out that a sign for the Caledonia restaurant had got the two languages muddled. Speaking to The National, he explained it looks as though whoever has designed the sign has simply googled Gaelic for "Are you hungry?", adding that the search engine consistently thinks Gaelic means Irish. The slogan in the sign currently reads "An bhfuil ochras orst", with McSween explaining it should instead say "A bhfuil an tachras orst". It's just a kick in the teeth that companies do this, McSween said. They have some good intentions, but the disrespect not to check or confirm the spelling / grammar is ridiculous. They wouldn't do that with French or Spanish or any other language. In his own social media post, McSpeen said, "Good morning at GLA_airport. Maybe don't just Google your translations. That's Irish, not Scottish Gaelic. Show some respect. Hire someone to translate it, or even just try @Learn Gaelic Scot, maybe." A spokesperson for Glasgow Airport told The National the translation error was spotted by our retail team this morning and will be replaced by the airport partner responsible for the boarding. Many others also expressed frustration with the sign, with one user commenting, "I hope they get that corrected ASAP." "It's lazy and gives the appearance that they don't really care," said a second user, who added that it was easier to have got it right. A third meanwhile called on the airport to sort this ignorance out. By Adam Robertson, The National, recorded on Wednesday, 15th of May 2024. The Culture section. Photos show Glasgow transformed into Germany for new Netflix show. By Ben Waddle, reporter. Part of Glasgow has been turned into Germany for a new TV drama. It's understood that Cadogan Square in Anderston has been transformed for the filming of Lockerbie, a new TV drama. In pictures captured by our photographer, the area can be seen full of German signs, shops and cars. It comes after the cast for the new drama based on the Lockerbie bombing was announced in March. The BBC and Netflix announced the cast for the forthcoming show being made by World Productions. The new 6-part series is based on the real events surrounding the 1988 Lockerbie bombing. On December 21, 1988, flight Pan Am 103 was en route from Heathrow to JFK when a bomb exploded in its hold over the small Scottish town of Lockerbie, killing 270 people, including 43 British citizens and 190 Americans. It was the worst ever terror attack on British soil and the first major one on US citizens. The cast for the new show includes Scottish actor Peter Mullen, Connor Swindells from Sex Education, Patrick J. Adams from Suits, Merritt Weaver, Tony Curran, Eddie Marsan, Lauren Lyle, Andrew Rothney, Phyllis Logan, Parker Sawyers, James Harkness, Khalid Laith and Amanda Drew. Lockerbie will air on BBC One and BBC iPlayer, followed by Netflix in the UK and globally. The BBC says filming for the TV drama began earlier this year in Scotland and will continue in both Malta and Toronto. By Ben Waddle.
From The National, Tuesday the 14th of May, from the news section. Anti-racism protests planned for Hopkins gig. This article is unattributed. Anti-racism campaigners are set to hold a protest outside a Katie Hopkins comedy gig in Edinburgh this week. The right-wing commentator and former contestant on The Apprentice has previously been condemned for claiming that migrants are like cockroaches, engaging in climate change denial, and describing London as Cannes Londonistan. In recent years, she has attempted to rebrand herself as a comic. She is scheduled to perform one show in Perth and 2 in Edinburgh as part of her latest tour, entitled Silly Cow. However, campaign group Stand Up to Racism has said members will peacefully protest outside Hopkins' show at the BMC Social Club near Tynecastle, Edinburgh, on Friday. Scottish Greens co-leader and Edinburgh MSP Lorna Slater said she was deeply disappointed to hear Hopkins was scheduled to appear in Edinburgh. She said, "Her dehumanising comments about migrants and her horrific Islamophobic views do not represent the people of Edinburgh and should have no place or platform in Scotland. Scotland is defined by its welcoming and compassionate values, and those who espouse hatred and racism are not welcome here." In Perth, the group Perth Against Racism has organised an evening of comedy, music and poetry on the scheduled night of Hopkins' appearance as an alternative to our hateful rhetoric. Ross Mackenzie, an independent councillor representing the Edinburgh ward where Hopkins is due to appear, said, "Katie Hopkins makes her living by spreading racist hate speech. She lost her media platforms after using overtly fascist rhetoric and is now having to resort to events like these in private members' clubs. It's very disappointing to see this event is scheduled to take place in the Sighthill/Gorgie ward I represent. The area is home to many working class migrants whose interests are indivisible from those of the wider population. We must resist all attempts to divide people according to race, religion or ethnicity. and the article was unattributed. From the National, Tuesday the 14th of May, from the news section, Indie activist could be referred to counter-extremism programme. This article is an exclusive by James Walker, political reporter. An extremism expert has warned there is a danger that campaigning for, or even debating, Scottish independence could come under UK counter-extremism legislation in the future. Professor Chris Allen, who leads the Extremism Hub at Leicester University's Centre for Hate Studies, told The National that Yesers could potentially even be referred to the Home Office Prevent Counter-Extremism programme. It comes after Rishi Sunak included Scottish nationalism in a major speech on Monday about extremism. The Prime Minister, in a passage under the heading The Dangers, listed Russia, Iran, North Korea, anti-Semitism, gender activists, and finally Scottish nationalism as posing threats to the UK. The UK government's use of the term extremism has come under fire recently after a new broader definition was unveiled by Community Secretary Michael Gove in March. It updated another definition from 2011 and defined the term as advancing ideologies based on violence, hatred or intolerance, which aim to destroy the fundamental rights and freedoms of others or undermine, overturn or replace UK's system of liberal parliamentary democracy and democratic rights. Allen said that while Scottish nationalism doesn't fall under either of the definitions, the UK government is weaponising the term against perceived critics and enemies to delegitimise them, and that it could have knock-on effects. Not only does the new definition help to shape and inform and sway the opinion of the general public, but I think that also kind of delegitimises those who are being named, he said. One of the things the government said was that they will try to stop funding going to these groups, any engagement and interaction at a state level. It could start to inform the way the police thinks, the way local authorities thinks, the NHS and the education system. Allen added, even having a university debate around the strengths and weaknesses of an independent Scotland could come under counter-extremism legislation. And suddenly, someone expressing this could be referred to the Home Office's Prevent Counter-Extremism programme. The academic added that indie marches could also be under threat. We saw it with peaceful protests around the monarchy, we've seen it with Gaza, he said. It's not even scaremongering, it's not being sensationalist. These are things that have actually happened. This is looking at where this could go and the possibility for where it could go. The academic's comments come after a similar warning from Tommy Shepherd. The SNP MP previously told The National that the new definition should be regarded as a threat to the Scots' rights to campaign for independence and constitutional change. It's not just pro-independence marches this could affect. It could also affect groups who want to change the monarchy, or worse for change to aspects of foreign policy. It's outrageous, he said. Anyone who goes against what the Conservative Party wants is now in their sights for these sort of restrictions. And that article was an exclusive, written by James Walker, and read by me, Ian McKenna. From the National, Tuesday the 14th of May, from the news section. £100 million boost for major Highland wind turbine port. Government banks plough in more cash. Report by Adam Robertson. A Highland port set to become an offshore wind hub has received a further £100 million of investment from two government-owned banks. Haventus, the energy transition company that owns Ardersier Port in the Moray Firth, has now secured a total of £400 million for the construction of new port facilities that it says will underpin the creation of a nationally significant facility for the industrial-scale deployment of new offshore wind turbines. Work has already begun on a new 650-metre quay wall and associated quayside. The completed 450-acre site, with quayside access and infrastructure for the marshalling, integration, manufacture and assembly of offshore wind components, is set to open in 2025. In 2023, the project received £300 million from energy investment firm Quantum Capital Group. The Scottish National Investment Bank, SNIB, and UK Infrastructure Bank, UKIB, have now each invested a further £50 million. Haventus Chief Executive Lewis Gillies said, "We are delighted to have secured the support of the two banks. With their support, and that of Quantum, Ardnasey Airport is poised to become a critical offshore wind hub and an important job creator and enabler. It will play a crucial role in helping the country meet its net zero ambitions." He added, "With work now underway on site, we aim to have the facility open and operational in the second half of next year. Once complete, the company says the site will be the largest dedicated offshore wind deployment port facility in Scotland, capable of hosting and supporting gigawatt-scale projects. It is one of the largest industrial regeneration projects in the Highlands in decades, and is set to re-establish the port as a major employer by creating and supporting hundreds of jobs." First Minister John Swinney said the development would deliver a fairer, greener future for everyone. He said, "Scotland's growing offshore wind capabilities present an era-defining opportunity, not only to achieve a just transition to net zero, but to harness the skills which lie across our energy sector and wider supply chain to create thousands of green jobs and transform our regional and national economies." The Ardnasey Airport redevelopment, which is central to the ambitions of the groundbreaking Inverness and Cromarty Firth Green Freeport, exemplifies this opportunity. This show of support from both banks demonstrates the huge confidence in this new facility. Andrew Boy, the UK Minister for Nuclear and Renewables, said, "Scotland is a pioneer in this important technology, and infrastructure investment of this size is a welcome boost to our clean energy targets while supporting the local economy with new jobs and opportunities." The £100 million investment is the first time SNIB and UKIB have co-financed a project since the two banks signed a Memorandum of Understanding formalising their close working relationship on projects in Scotland. Al Denholm, SNIB Chief Executive, said, "We expect the site at Ardnasey to be of significant strategic importance in supporting the growing offshore wind industry. We are pleased to fund this development and to be doing so with the UK Infrastructure Bank. The project perfectly aligns to our net zero mission and illustrates the benefits of our two organisations working together." And that report was by Adam Robertson.
The National News on Wednesday the 15th of May. Call for a plan to stem the flow of nurses out of the profession. An article written by Gregor Young. A nursing body has urged the Scottish Government to create a retention strategy to keep people in the profession. In the year up to December 2023, NHS Scotland figures showed the number of nurses rose from 61,567 whole-time equivalent staff to 63,605. But vacancies in the field still remain high, with 3,961.8 whole-time equivalent posts still unfilled as of the end of last year, a drop from the peak of more than 6,500 in December 2021, but still higher than before the pandemic. A report released today by the Royal College of Nursing Scotland has called for a plan to keep nurses in the health service. The Scottish Government must develop and implement a fully funded nursing retention strategy that addresses well-being, workplace culture, development opportunities, flexible working and career progression by April 2025, one of the report's 10 recommendations said. The report found that Scotland also lagged behind the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD's, average of 9.2 nurses per 1,000 of the population, with 7.9. The country was also well behind the figures for Finland, Norway and Ireland, which boasted 18.9, 18.3 and 15.2 respectively. The Royal College of Nursing Scotland's board chair, Julie Lamberth, said that the situation was not sustainable. At no point has NHS Scotland employed the number of nursing staff it says it needs to deliver safe care, and the registered nurse to resident ratio in many care homes makes safe care impossible. At the same time, with the squeeze on budgets, we are hearing reports of nursing roles being axed. The Scottish Government must get serious about the workforce crisis and the long-term implications for the public's health. Nursing vacancies are having a damaging impact on our members' ability to provide safe and effective care and on their own well-being when, shift after shift, they work extra unpaid hours to cover gaps and go home feeling that they are unable to provide the quality of care that they want. An article written by Gregor Young. The National Politics on Wednesday the 15th of May. Emergency Bill move to clear Scots Horizon victims. An article written by Jane MacLeod. Emergency legislation that will clear the name of Scottish sub-postmasters wrongly convicted during the Horizon scandal has been introduced at Holyrood. Scottish Justice Secretary Angela Constance said that lives had been ruined by convictions which were based on the faulty IT system used by the Post Office. Ms Constance said, "The scale of the scandal and the length of time that the victims have waited for justice means that we are taking an unprecedented step of introducing legislation to right this terrible wrong and asking Parliament for it to be processed as an emergency bill." The Post Office Horizon System Offences Scotland Bill will result in those who were wrongly convicted being exonerated, and with their convictions quashed, they will then be able to access the UK Government Financial Redress Scheme. The legislation has been introduced by the Scottish Government after the UK Government refused to extend the bill it introduced in the wake of the Horizon scandal to cover Scotland. While it will proceed through Holyrood on an expedited basis, the Scottish Government said its bill will not receive final approval until after the UK legislation. Ms Constance said this meant MSPs would be able to take account of changes in the UK bill when considering the Scottish legislation. She insisted that the quickest, easiest route to deal with Horizon-related miscarriages of justice north of the border would have been for Scotland to be included in the scope of the UK Government's bill, as Northern Ireland has been. Ms Constance said, "Innocent sub-postmasters had their lives ruined by being wrongly convicted of offences of dishonesty on the evidence of the faulty Post Office Horizon system. The quickest, easiest route to overturn these miscarriages of justice would have been for the UK Government to extend their Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill to cover sub-postmasters in Scotland. However, our repeated requests for this were refused." The Justice Secretary said the bill introduced at Holyrood mirrors that of UK legislation to ensure parity for affected sub-postmasters in Scotland with those elsewhere in the UK and to ensure access to the UK Government's compensation scheme. Ms Constance insisted the Scottish Government will not do anything to jeopardise equality and parity for victims, so the final stage of the bill cannot be considered in the Scottish Parliament until after the UK legislation has been passed. This will ensure that MSPs can take account of any amendments made to the UK bill. The bill will not apply to sub-postmasters whose conviction has been considered by the High Court in connection with an appeal. The planned law will exonerate convicted sub-postmasters with relevant convictions between September the 23rd, 1996 and December the 31st, 2018. Scottish Conservative Justice spokesperson Russell Findlay MSP said that the legislation was welcome and long overdue. He said, "SNP ministers knew from the outset that Scotland's distinct legal system and prosecution mechanism required a separate law to deliver justice to Scottish sub-postmasters. But instead of getting on and delivering it, the SNP typically wasted time on a constitutional spat with the UK Government, as well as creating confusion on whether they backed blanket exonerations. Given that this legislation looks to be largely a copy-and-paste job, Scottish victims of this appalling scandal have needlessly been kept in the dark for longer than those in the rest of the UK." An article written by Jane MacLeod. The National Politics on Wednesday the 15th of May. LBC's James O'Brien tears into Rishi Sunak over Scottish nationalism comments. An article written by Adam Robertson. James O'Brien has said the Prime Minister insulted anybody who entertains hopes of Scottish independence after he mentioned Scottish nationalists in a speech about extremist threats facing the UK. Speaking at an event in London organised by the Policy Exchange think tank, Mr Sunak claimed that an axis of authoritarian states were attempting to undermine British values. In a passage under the heading The Dangers, Mr Sunak listed Russia, Iran, North Korea, anti-Semitism, gender activists and finally Scottish nationalism as posing threats to the UK. The Prime Minister has faced criticism for his comments, with the SNP's Deputy Westminster leader Mary Black branding it a desperate attack on Scottish voters. Speaking on LBC, James O'Brien said, Mr Sunak insulted anybody who entertains hopes of Scottish independence in the most extraordinary and unnecessary way. And remember, these speeches are written days in advance. It's not like this show. He doesn't just turn up and start talking and then wonder sometimes what on earth he was thinking when he let that come out of his mouth. He's deliberately sought to alienate, in, I would argue, a profoundly offensive fashion, anybody who is currently drawn to the SNP. The host added that he genuinely doesn't understand why Mr Sunak would take this approach, adding that these speeches are pored over by various aides and advisers. He continued, they're delivered at, in this case, a secretly funded think tank, would you believe, and you think I exaggerate about these matters. But the question of how offensive it is, the one that you answer by giving me a call to tell me what you felt when you heard Scottish nationalism being listed alongside Russia, Iran, North Korea, anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim hatred. Scottish Greens MSP Maggie Chapman was also among those to hit out at the comments, labelling them completely absurd. Mr O'Brien added, what is this designed to achieve? It can't be accidental. It's not off the cuff. It's not something that happened because he didn't realise his microphone was still on. It's a deliberate attempt to somehow associate evil regimes in Russia, Iran, North Korea and elsewhere with Scottish nationalism. And the calculation must be that there is a constituency to whom this will appeal. An article written by Adam Robertson. The National, on Wednesday, the 15th of May. Opinion. Israel didn't win, but Eurovision can't carry on as usual now. A column written by Elaine Scattermoon. Israel have been no strangers to using Eurovision politically in the past, using pink washing to make their international image into a gay-friendly paradise. However, this year this ramped up hugely, with a song originally called October Rain, later rewritten with minimal changes to be Hurricane, about the deadly Hamas attacks of October the 7th last year, a heinous atrocity that is used as an ongoing justification for atrocities being carried out in Gaza. The European Broadcasting Union, or EBU, originally rejected the song as overtly political, but were forced to back down when Israel's President Isaac Herzog intervened, which doesn't exactly aid their claim of being non-political. All this while Israel continued military action across the Gaza Strip, from Gaza City to Rafah, causing many examples of what Amnesty International and even members of the United Nations have called war crimes. In 2022, Russia was unceremoniously booted out of Eurovision following its invasion of Ukraine, with the EBU releasing a statement saying that this was done to prevent the contest being brought into disrepute. So there is precedent, yet this has not happened this year with Israel. Eurovision maintains the line it is a non-political event, but this has always been a meaningless disclaimer. It's simply a matter of what politics has the right to be considered political. One example of how hollow this claim of apoliticism rings is that while sentiments of support for Israel were all but encouraged in and around this year's contest, the same cannot be said for sentiments of support for Palestine. Palestinian flags were banned, with artists and attendees both being checked carefully to prevent any being brought into the venue. Fake cheering was apparently played into the broadcast mix to try and drown out any boos around the Israeli entry, something that had first been used in 2015 to hide the audience's hostility towards Russia's Polina Gagarina after Russia passed its anti-gay law. Most notably, artist Erik Saade, a half-Palestinian Swedish singer who earned his home country third place in 2011 with the song Popular, was condemned by the EBU for wearing a keffiyeh that he had received from his father while performing in the opening of semi-final 1, despite it being his heritage, akin to a Scot wearing a kilt. The message seemed clear. Being Palestinian at all is considered unacceptably political. This has not been limited to just happening outside of the venue. Contestants have spoken out since the end of the contest, condemning the EBU and the Israeli delegation for creating a deeply unpleasant and outright hostile environment for them this year, with Ireland's outspokenly pro-Palestinian queer artist Bambi Thug being one notable example. They were banned by the EBU from having "ceasefire" written on their chin in Ogham script, but this, alongside condemnations of Israel's hostility in Gaza, meant they earned a lot of negative attention from the Israeli delegation and supporters online. The internet was awash on Saturday night with Israeli voices and right-wing demagogues mocking them for placing just below Israel, using homophobic and transphobic language in the process. The Israeli delegation became known for recording and harassing any artists that either were or were perceived as anti-Israel, and despite Bambi and others, including Greece's Marina Satti, complaining to the EBU and the EBU agreeing that this was against the rules, no action was taken. These artists had to witness Eden Golan repeatedly talking about being the victim of hateful attention, all while being reportedly subjected to it themselves by Eden's delegation and supporters. The atmosphere was so grim before the final that several national spokespeople withdrew, including last year's runner-up Garia. All of this added up to a tense atmosphere that was generally invisible to the cameras and those at home, bar the booing for Eurovision's executive supervisor Martin Osterdahl, whose position now seems untenable. In the end, despite a massive televote for Israel that seemed entirely out of proportion to the song itself, and aided by support from figures who normally would pour scorn on the contest, like the Netherlands' Geert Wilders, Israel did not win, and we got a glorious winner. However, with the overnight assault in Gaza drowned out in the news by Eurovision coverage, Israeli government figures speaking about the televote for Eden Golan shows Europe supports Israel's Gaza offensive, and queer Lithuanian contestant Sylvester Belt tweeting how this year's contest has left him traumatised. It is very clear that, in the words of winner Nemo themselves after their win, maybe Eurovision needs a little bit of fixing. A column written by Elaine Scattermoon. The National News on Wednesday, the 15th of May. Police clash with pro-Palestinian activists at Glasgow arms sale protest. An article written by Adam Robertson. Footage has shown police clashing with pro-Palestinian protesters at a demonstration in Glasgow on Wednesday morning. We told how protesters had blockaded the Thales factory in Govan in a protest over arms sales to Israel. Activists say parts manufactured on site have been sold to the Israeli army for use in Gaza, where more than 35,000 Palestinians have been killed since the 7th of October. Footage obtained by The National has shown police moving in on protesters who were standing with banners calling for arms sales to be halted. The group claims they, alongside others from across the globe, are enforcing an arms embargo from below in the face of continued lack of action by the UK government. A spokesperson for Police Scotland confirmed that officers arrived at the scene shortly after 5 a.m. They said at around 5 o'clock on Wednesday morning, May the 15th, police were called to a report of a demonstration within the grounds of a business premises on Linthouse Road, Govan, in Glasgow. Officers remain at the scene. One of the protesters, Jamie, condemned Scotland's complicity in the UK's ties with Israel. Scotland is a huge part of the UK's bloody links to Israel. Our leaders in Holyrood and Westminster aren't taking action. In fact, they're actively contributing to these horrors, he said. That's why we're doing the embargo ourselves, bringing Scottish solidarity to the people of Palestine, who have suffered uncountable horrors and humiliation. All our eyes are on Rafah right now, but this horror did not start with Rafah. It's been decades of bloody occupation. We can do our bit today to hit the profits of those who value money over human life and dignity. An article written by Adam Robertson. The National World News on Wednesday the 15th of May. Putin set for a China visit. An article issued by the National News Desk. Vladimir Putin will make a 2-day state visit to China this week, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said yesterday. The Russian president will meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping during the trip, which starts tomorrow. The Kremlin said Mr. Putin was going on Mr. Xi's invitation. It said it will be Mr. Putin's first foreign trip since he began his 5th term in office. China's foreign ministry said discussions would centre on cooperation in various fields of bilateral relations, as well as international and regional issues of common concern. An article issued by the National News Desk. The National Politics on Wednesday the 15th of May. MSPs pass a bill that will boost powers to deal with unsafe cladding. An article written by Josh Carmichael. MSPs have voted to pass a bill aimed at reducing the risk of Grenfell Tower-style fires caused by cladding on buildings. The Housing Cladding Remediation Scotland Bill was passed unanimously by 116 MSPs yesterday. The Scottish Government set up a cladding remediation programme following the London fire which killed 72 people in 2017, as the material on the outside of the building is believed to have contributed to the spread of the blaze. The bill will make the delivery of the scheme easier by giving ministers power to assess and carry out remediation on buildings with unsafe cladding, with any remediation work then recorded in a special register. Ministers have been criticised for the scheme's slow progress, whereas England had, as of the end of last year, started or finished work on 42% of the 1,608 properties found to have cladding on the facade. During the debate, Housing Minister Paul McLennan said, "We know we've got lots to do in terms of the remediation programme. I've talked about the bill enabling faster delivery of the cladding remediation programme, addressing barriers experienced to date, allowing us to deliver that step change in pace that is required to best serve those homeowners and residents potentially affected by unsafe cladding." Miles Briggs, the Scottish Conservative housing spokesperson, praised the consensual nature of the minister's engagement in the passage of the bill. Mark Griffin, Scottish Labour housing spokesperson, also praised the minister's approach, but was also critical of the government's use of a framework bill, which leaves details to be decided through regulations devised by ministers. An article written by Josh Carmichael. The National Politics on Wednesday the 15th of May. Scottish Government U-turns on funding cut for men's mental health charity. An article written by Alistair Ferguson. Government ministers have U-turned on the decision to cut funding for one of Scotland's largest men's mental health charities after reports it was on the verge of collapsing. The Scottish Men's Shed Association, or SMSA, had previously said that they were months away from ceasing to exist due to funding being axed and with no alternative having been provided. However, Shirley Ann Somerville, the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, said in Holyrood that the Scottish Government plans to restore funding to the important national organisation. She told MSPs that the Scottish Government plans to establish financial support for the charity, which has 10,000 members across the country, to avoid any future uncertainty. She said, "The Scottish Government has provided £795,000 worth of funding to the Scottish Men's Shed Association since 2016, supporting the movement to grow from 5 sheds to 200 across Scotland. We understand it's a very challenging time for small organisations and that the SMSA is working to secure funding from charity donors and from the private sector. Given this, I can confirm today that we will work with the organisation to identify and to provide the funding for this financial year to ensure that we support them in the months ahead to develop broad, sustainable support for this important national organisation. And we hope that this will help to avoid future uncertainty and assist local sheds to flourish. The SMSA was founded over 20 years ago and aims to tackle social isolation among men. The charity aims to establish grassroots communities in shared spaces with the goal of sharing experiences and skills and forming companionship. With 200 sheds which act as community spaces across Scotland, the SMSA is one of the largest men's mental health charities in the country. Responding to the Scottish Government's announcement of additional funding for the SMSA, SNP MSP Bob Doris said, SMSA is vital to combating poor male mental health and social isolation, and with further Scottish Government support, this work will continue and expand. With £795,000 worth of funding from the SNP Scottish Government since 2016, the SMSA has grown from 5 to 200 sheds across Scotland, and I hope this funding supports further growth. I'm delighted that this SNP government has continued to listen to these organisations as we continue to do all that we can to improve the mental health and well-being of everyone in Scotland. Fears were sparked when the charity's chief executive, Jason Schroeder, told the Sunday Post that the association was on the cusp of closure due to lack of funding. He said, "We've got enough funding for about 9 or 10 months, and then we'll be looking at winding up. That will mean that more than 200 groups will lose all their support, and all the new groups that are starting will have no support. We'll be celebrating our 10th anniversary in October. Hopefully we'll be celebrating rather than closing. The truth is that the impact of us closing would be felt throughout the sector and in communities across Scotland." An article written by Alistair Ferguson. The National News on Wednesday the 15th of May. Food bank emergency parcels nearly double in 5 years. An article written by Lucy Jackson. The number of emergency food parcels handed out across the UK in a single year has reached its highest level at more than 3 million. The Trussell Trust Food Bank Network said that the figures had risen for packages for both adults and children, and the total is now almost double that of 5 years ago. There were 3,121,404 parcels distributed by food banks in its network in the year up to the end of March, made up of 1,977,308 for adults and 1,144,096 for children. The charity said first-time users, of which there were 655,000, were down slightly on last year, but up 40% from 5 years ago. Parcels going to households that included someone of pension age were up by more than a quarter to 179,000, the organisation said, noting that older people, especially renters, were finding themselves unable to afford essentials and facing hunger and severe hardship. Ahead of a general election, the Trussell Trust has called on political parties to commit to tackling the problem, urging them to back a supportive social security system and better help for parents, carers and people with disabilities, who can face increased living costs. Chief Executive Emma Reevey said, "It's 2024 and we're facing historically high levels of food bank need. As a society, we cannot allow this to continue. We must not let food banks become the new norm. As we approach a general election, we urgently need all political leaders to set out how they will build a future where no one needs a food bank to survive. Voters want to see a change, and we need cross-government action at all levels to deliver it. We know what's pushing people to food banks, so we know what needs to change." Separately, the Charities Aid Foundation said the amount of money donated to food bank charities has increased by half year on year. Its research estimated that the public gave almost £1 billion last year. The foundation said that people had donated £973 million to food banks in 2023, up from £635 million the previous year. The number of donors supporting food banks remains steady year on year, but people have been giving more, it said, with the average donation up by £10, from £22 in 2022 to £32. The UK government said its cost of living support package had prevented 1.3 million people falling into poverty in 2022 to 2023. An article written by Lucy Jackson. The National Politics on Wednesday, the 15th of May. The UK government denies removing asylum seekers from Scotland to block legal aid. An article written by James Walker. Asylum seekers at risk of being deported are not being removed from Scotland to England to deny them legal aid, Justice Secretary Alex Chalk has said. During Justice questions at the Commons, SNP Home Affairs spokesperson Alison Thewlis questioned if it was the government's deliberate policy to move asylum seekers in order to prevent them challenging a potential removal, including to Rwanda. In England and Wales, 25% of the population is eligible to receive legal aid, in contrast to Scotland, where 75% of the population is eligible to receive legal aid, according to a report from the Signet Library. The government is seeking to get flights to send migrants to Rwanda off the ground by July, after the Safety of Rwanda Asylum and Immigration Act became law last month. Ms Thewlis said, "Can I ask the Minister, is there a deliberate policy to remove people from Scotland to England to prevent them accessing legal aid, as they'd be able to do so in Scotland and would be fully entitled to do so? What guidance has been issued to lawyers in this respect? And lastly, what right do MPs have to intervene in cases of removal? Because I've been told that MPs have been requested to have wet signatures from people who have been removed to immigration removal centres in England." Mr Chalk replied, "The first answer to the first question was no, that isn't correct. But the point about legal advice is really important. People should get legal advice so that they can make their points. That's why we're investing heavily. When the Illegal Migration Act comes into force, there'll be a 15% uplift. We've invested £1.5 billion to re-accredit senior case workers, and also we're paying for travel time. We recognise, of course, this is robust legislation, necessarily robust. We're also ensuring that people get the legal advice they need." Yesterday, SNP Justice spokesperson Chris Stevens said one of his constituents from Glasgow South West had been removed from Scotland to England and threatened with deportation. He said, "Can Mr Chalk answer this question? Why are MPs being denied access to their constituents? That seems quite outrageous." Mr Stevens added, "And does he not think it's unacceptable that lawyers and their elected representatives should not be impeded with arbitrary barriers when accessing their constituents threatened with deportation?" Mr Chalk replied, "Of course, MPs should have access in appropriate circumstances, but the critical point is going to be for individuals to get legal support, with no discourtesy to Mr Stevens. As a constituency MP, that legal support is important." An article written by James Walker.
The Herald, Friday the 17th of May, from the news section. Fergus Marine warning, it faces closure in a short period of time. The nationalised shipyard firm at the centre of Scotland's ferry fiasco could have to close in a short period of time without action from the Scottish Government. Ministers have been warned. Ministers have been told they face tough decisions over the future of Ferguson Marine, which is building two wildly late and over-budget ferries. Stephen McCabe, the leader of Inverclyde Council, said, "Without more work coming in, the yard could have to cut its workforce, or may be facing closure within a reasonably short period of time." But despite the latest appeals, the Scottish Government remain uncommitted to providing direct ferry work that could save the firm. The Scottish Government has withheld financial support for the Port Glasgow yard, despite its advisers being in favour of a support package to secure its future. The Herald revealed in November that the board at Ferguson's warned a failure to get a committed investment of £25 million to support future work cast significant doubt on its ability to continue. Fergus Marine, in brackets Port Glasgow, made a net loss of 1.3 million in 2022-23, laid bare the risks to the business and pointed to a failure to get a committed investment of 25 million to support future work at the Inverclyde yard after the delivery of the ferry fiasco vessels. They admitted that the lack of investment to upgrade shipyard facilities as part of a 5-year business plan puts at risk its hopes of extra work from BAE Systems, which is delivering City-class Type 26 frigates on the Clyde. The Scottish Government-owned yard is looking to the future in the hopes of securing more work, with calls for a direct award of smaller ferries planned for ferry operator Calmac. Ministers, however, have been resistant to such a move, which, it says, can only be done in a small number of circumstances to satisfy state aid regulations. Critics say that it has been willing to support a direct award publicly funded contract to the state-owned ferry operator Calmac over providing lifeline ferry services in perpetuity. The Ferguson Marine Board have admitted that a lack of investment to upgrade facilities is jeopardising hopes of extra work from BAE Systems, which is delivering Type 26 frigates on the Clyde. It has also placed a question mark over hopes to win a contract from Transport Scotland for the replacement of up to 7 ageing ferry vessels serving the Clyde and Hebrides. Scotland's lifeline services have been dogged with issues, with the delivery of ferries Glen Sannox and Glen Rosa still not online after being due to be available for passengers in the first half of 2018 when Ferguson Marine was under the control of tycoon Jim McCall. With both now due to serve Arran, they are getting on for 6 years late, and the last estimates suggest the capital costs of delivery could have more than quadrupled from the original £97 million contract cost. Interested parties, including Deputy First Minister and Economy Secretary Kate Forbes, unions, the local council and representatives of the yard met on Thursday for a summit in Greenock. Mr McCabe warned that if the government's intention is to put the yard into private ownership, it needs to put the yard in a position where it needs to be competitive to make it attractive to buyers. To do that in the short term, it needs to invest in the yard, and it needs to give the yard an order to sustain it for the next few years, to a position where they can potentially put it back into the private sector. Because the work has run out, there is not more orders on the order book, and this yard is facing closure within a reasonably short period of time. Ferguson Marine was taken over by the Scottish Government 5 years ago, after its financial collapse under the control of Mr McCall, as a row erupted over long delays and mounting costs over the delivery of the vessels. Since then, 2 men, Tim Hare and David Tidman, have come and gone after being tasked with the blessing of the Scottish Government to steer Ferguson Marine into calmer waters. Mr McCabe said after the summit, "There was a consensus in the room that we absolutely want Ferguson's to survive, for investment in the yard, work for the yard and for the yard to thrive. There's a strong cost-benefit case for a direct award to Ferguson's. Ferguson's is the last commercial shipyard on the Clyde. We are a maritime nation. We cannot afford for this yard to close. We need to build Scottish ferries in Scottish towns for Scottish people." It was a positive meeting, but I'm not counting my chickens, because tough decisions need to be made, and they need to be made in a matter of weeks, not months. Miss Forbes remained uncommitted to a direct award. The Scottish Government shares a common goal with GMB Scotland, the yard, the workers and all stakeholders who met today to seek a sustainable future for Ferguson Marine, which works for employees, the taxpayer and Scotland's economy, she said. "I have heard many ideas and been impressed by the energy and commitment of everyone involved. The contributions will be at the forefront of my mind over the coming weeks as we consider proposals for the yard's medium and long-term future. Ferguson's workers deserve huge praise for the dedication and hard work. Despite the well-documented problems, Glen Sannox is on course for delivery by the end of July and Glen Rosa will be completed next year." GMB senior organiser Gary Cook said, "The small ferry contract must be the start of a pipeline of work to support the yard. These contracts would become a springboard back to profitability and help the workforce repay taxpayers for the faith and investment already placed in the yard, he said. The workers are committed, skilled and completely blameless for the errors made in recent years and must be given the chance to show that. Kate Forbes will leave Greenock today under no illusion about how important these contracts are to the yard and how they will help protect its shipbuilding heritage for generations to come. Scottish Tory Transport spokesman Graham Simpson said, "The discussion at the summit was useful and frank," adding that the Deputy First Minister should learn from the dithering of her predecessors and make a quick decision. She needs to decide whether the small ferries work is awarded to the yard or put out to tender, and whether she is prepared to invest in the yard to make it commercially competitive, he said. These decisions should have been taken already, but instead the SNP government have focused on delivering a ferry which is late and over budget. That was an article by Martin Williams. The Herald, Friday the 17th of May, from the news section. First Minister vows to go all out to build Scotland's economy. First Minister John Swinney said he would go all out to encourage investment in Scotland as he sets out his vision for the economy. Speaking ahead of a speech in Glasgow on Friday, Mr Swinney described his government as a firmly pro-business administration that would work in partnership with business and trade unions to boost economic growth. He said this approach, coupled with resources such as renewable energy, were grounds for optimism, but added that it was necessary for Scotland to work even harder on the economy with the powers it had to offset the effects of Brexit. The First Minister said, "My goal is to help people live happier and healthier lives with higher living standards and to help businesses boost profitability." The evidence shows that independent countries that are comparable to Scotland are wealthier and fairer than the UK. Scotland has the talents and resources to match that performance with independence, but in the here and now and in the face of Brexit, we must work even harder to help Scotland's economy with the powers we have. I will go all out to encourage investment in Scotland, and I will ensure people know my government is a firmly pro-business administration. A partnership with trade unions and business will be at the core of my approach, and through that approach and given our resources, not least incredible renewable energy, we should look to the future with hope and optimism. That was an article by Josh Carmichael.
That concludes this week's edition of the National Podcast. Please remember to subscribe to our channels at Tune Review and to tell your friends about our service.